Welcome to the Upside Journal podcast. In 2026, domestic venture capital is struggling with extended exit timelines and dry powder gridlock. Yet, a sophisticated layer of cross-border diaspora business networks is quietly unlocking predictable, counter-cyclical returns in AI and climate tech. Today, we're breaking down the hidden alpha traditional funds are missing. In this explainer, we're going to look at how the difference between true alpha and, well, just average returns is ultimately determined by exactly how leadership teams structure their choices.
We're going to systematically deconstruct the mechanics of executive judgment across four core themes today. First, the VC paradox of 2026. Then, asymmetric information and talent verification. After that, we'll dive into the climate tech supply chain edge and wrap up with building a repeatable flywheel framework. Ultimately, we're giving you an authoritative blueprint for institutionalizing decision quality.
All right, part one, the VC paradox of 2026, flawless cadence versus poor judgment. Here, we analyze the false security of operational cadence.
Operational cadence governs when decisions happen. It's your scheduling, your weekly meetings, your pristine dashboards. But you know what? It completely ignores how well those decisions are actually made. Contrast that with true decision process quality, which is all about evaluating alternatives and actively seeking disconfirming evidence. A leadership team can have flawless meeting schedules, but still suffer from fundamentally poor decision process quality. Timing alone just cannot rescue bad judgment. And the real-world consequence of this is frankly staggering. 56%. FIS data reveals that despite massive capital investments, 56% of companies completely failed to achieve market agility from AI. It proves definitively that just layering technology over fundamentally broken decision frameworks will never fix the underlying poor judgment. When you break down those structural barriers, 73% of firms face sky-high implementation costs, 58% are struggling with integration, and 51% are completely paralyzed by data quality issues. These failures compound over time. As a result, businesses are literally losing an average of $98.5 million annually to operational inefficiencies, cyber threats, and disconnected data architecture. Moving to Section 2, Information and Talent Verification, or really, the architecture of cognitive bias. We must clinically deconstruct the psychological distortions that warp executive proposals and create asymmetric information.
First up is sunk cost escalation. In a business context, this means continuing to fund a failing initiative driven entirely by the psychological cost of admitting a prior decision was wrong. Sunk cost escalation is a mathematical distortion, and it frequently compounds with organizational tenure. It's especially dangerous when the exact same executive who championed an original bet is the one reviewing its continuation.
Then we have the planning fallacy. This is a systematic overconfidence where base cases rely on these incredibly optimistic, inside-view, bottom-up assumptions, instead of using objective external benchmarks. Coupled with confirmation bias, the planning fallacy proves exactly why individual willpower, like simply telling your executives to just be more objective, is a mathematically proven failure point.
Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman puts it perfectly here. He notes that while individuals are completely blind to their own biases, those biases can be neutralized at the organizational level. Cognitive debiasing requires explicit, structural interventions because most biases are completely invisible to the person actually experiencing them.
Let's look at Section 3, the climate tech edge. Here we detail the concrete structural safeguards absolutely required for de-risking high-stakes corporate bets. To secure an edge in complex supply chains and cross-border tech, firms have to implement rigid, structural safeguards during the recommendation review process. According to the Harvard Business Review framework, the absolute highest leverage intervention you can make is explicitly separating the act of generating an analysis from the act of reviewing a recommendation. You simply can't have the creator grading their own homework.
So how does this translate into a concrete governance structure? Kahneman, Lavallo, and Siboni designed a 12-question recommendation review checklist that acts as a mandatory audit. For self-interest and motivation errors, you institute a rigid review for over-optimism. For groupthink, where there's a dangerous lack of dissent, you discreetly solicit alternative views. And for overconfidence tied to unsubstantiated anchors, you force a re-anchoring with external benchmark figures. You also have to mandate a genuine admission of uncertainty. To do this, enforce reference class forecasting to benchmark internal forecasts against comparable past decisions. Furthermore, you must institutionalize the explicit designation of dissent.
You literally assign someone to actively argue the opposing case to surface the unspoken objections that groupthink usually suppresses. And before finalizing any high-stakes corporate bet, conducting a pre-mortem is an essential safeguard. Project into the future. Imagine the absolute worst has already happened. Develop a story about the causes, and then reassess the proposal to mitigate those exact risks. This reliably identifies the blind spots that forward-looking models always miss, effectively decoupling your outcomes from sheer luck.
Finally, Section 4, repeatable flywheel framework. Institutionalizing decision rights. Let's unpack the operating mechanics of putting all these principles into continuous practice.
The Bain Rapid Framework institutionalizes this excellence by completely separating review authority from execution ownership. It breaks down into 5 distinct roles. Recommend builds the case, agree holds narrow predefined veto rights, perform is the execution owner, input provides the facts, and decide is the single decision maker. The absolute linchpin of this rapid governance structure is that decide must be a single named individual. Having a group decision authority fatally diffuses accountability. And crucially, to avoid that sunk cost fallacy we talked about earlier, the decider must evaluate choices as if they were a brand new CEO coming in on day one, completely unattached to any past expenditures. Now, to maintain decision velocity, you must deploy explicit, quantified escalation triggers. You define material risk in exact dollar terms. This prevents the under-escalation of massive risks, where someone makes a risky unilateral call, and it simultaneously prevents the over-escalation of routine choices that just congest senior leadership. Pair that with strict response time SLAs, and you've got a tight system.
This brings us to a critical modern integration. This exact, identical, rigorous human governance framework must be directly applied to probabilistic AI recommendations. You demand explicitly disclosed confidence levels, ensure data harmonization, and maintain named human execution ownership for absolutely any AI output.
Because true decision velocity is achieved by categorizing decisions by their reversibility and compressing the time between governance steps. Importantly, you do not remove the steps themselves. By removing procedural ambiguity, you prove once and for all that speed and quality are absolutely not opposing forces. Capital has become highly commoditized, but the infrastructure to execute high-trust, cross-border deal flow is rare. To get ahead of these macro signals and access our premium investor network, subscribe to the Upside Journal and join our membership communities. See you in the next daily drop. But before you go, ask yourself, is your leadership team making high-stakes decisions by architectural design, or are you just hoping to get lucky?